So today I want to see if I can explain mortgage rates in a different way, because I've explained them before and I still have people think that mortgage rates are driven by the Fed, which they are not. So stay tuned, because I'm going to explain to you, and it might be a little technical, so get your smart cap on. Stay tuned, we're starting right now. So if you're a buyer in this housing market and nobody has taken the time to explain how mortgage rates work, I'm going to take a minute to do that for you. But I try to keep it little or less technical because it's not that challenging. But here's the thing. If you're following mortgage rates because you know they impact your borrowing costs, which they do, and I've done other videos on how to mitigate that with other parts of your mortgage payment, because the interest rate is not the only thing that impacts your mortgage payment, which is fascinating to me, because I'll see people try to get the lowest possible interest rate and then they get insurance that's twice what they should be paying. And I'm like, did you shop for that? So that's another video and it's right here, so check it out. But you're probably wondering what the future holds for these interest rates. I'm tired of predicting. My crystal ball broke probably last February. This Fed, very unpredictable, and I'm not enjoying their philosophy, but that's a different story. So let's see. Unfortunately, there's no easy way to answer the question about what's going to happen, especially with the Fed, because mortgage rates are notoriously hard to forecast. And they have been up until, I don't know, this Fed started raising them. I have lots of videos on inflation and what the Fed's doing and all of that. But for the time being, Byron Katie says, why are we arguing with reality? Right? The reality is the rates are where they are. The reality is you should buy a home regardless. Now, I've had people say to me, the investing market is waiting on the sidelines because of the interest rates. Oh, God. I'm an investor and I'm not waiting for anything. I know that real estate will always be a good investment. So, that being said, are they hard to forecast? Maybe. But the fact is that it doesn't matter, because the reality is they are what they are. But I'm going to try to explain to you how they get to where they are so that maybe you'll have a little more peace around it. Because at the end of the day, just buy a house. I mean, really, that's what it boils down to. But there's one thing that's historically a good indicator. So you can start to look at things in different ways. And what I find is that I feel more secure or confident when I know what I'm looking at and what things do and all of that, instead of just, when is it going to change? Because we don't know that. And once again, that's arguing with reality, so it's not a good course of action. But what's happening with these rates? Here's a relationship component that I want to share with you, that the 30-year mortgage rate, okay, so 30-year mortgage rate itself, and the 10-year treasury yield. So as I've shared many times, the Federal Reserve that raises the overnight Fed fund lending rate between banks does not set mortgage interest rates. That is a byproduct of what they're doing. And it directly affects what the bond market, which is the 10-year treasury bond, does. That's it. So what happens, though, is interesting. Here's a graph showing that these two metrics, right, the treasury bond and the 30-year interest rate, they have a correlation to one another. And since Freddie Mac started keeping mortgage rate records in 1972, that has been fairly consistent. Because as you can see, this graph shows historically the average spread between those two over the last 50 years has been 1.72 percentage points. And we in the industry call it basis. So 1%, right? So when you hear the rates go up, or you hear a mortgage person, because we love to use lingo and jargon in our industry, it's 100 basis points. So 1%, 1.00% to you as the consumer is what we call 100 basis points. So in this graph, 172 basis points, 1.72%, is the spread between the 30-year mortgage rate and the 10-year treasury bond. Now, if you look at that trend line, so if you want to go research, you can look at every single day what the 10-year treasury bond yield is. That's every day. You can do it on MSNBC, CNBC, Economic Reports, Fox, all those places, or online on, bond sites. So if you look at the trend line, you can see when the treasury yield trends up, mortgage rates usually respond. That's why I said, when I use the term, the bond market drives the 30-year, 15-year, 10-year interest rate, that's what I'm talking about. Those 10-year treasury bonds, and there's other bond markets out there, 1-year treasury, 3-year treasury, all of that stuff. And if you've ever bought bonds for your kids, that's what you're buying. You're buying treasury bonds. But when the yield drops, mortgage rates tend to follow. Now, what does that mean? It means that bond market, because it's traded just like the stock market. So, and frankly, I think the stock market, I've mentioned this a couple of times, it's the Las Vegas for people that think that they don't want to go to Vegas. The stock market is a crap game, really. You're throwing the dice, you're seeing what's happening. Some people invest and do it based on fundamentals. Some people just invest in crypto because everybody says it's going to happen. And, I don't know if you remember the .com meltdown, but I'm telling you, I don't like crypto. Okay, little editorial. Let's get back to the bond. While they typically move in sync like this, as you can see on this graph, the gap between the two has pretty much remained about 1.72 for quite some time. Long time, as a matter of fact. But here's what's interesting and fascinating to notice, that the spread is widening beyond the norm lately. So see this graph. Well, what does that mean? Well, it's good news, actually. If you're asking yourself what's pushing the spread beyond its typical average, it's primarily because of uncertainty in the financial markets. So let me put this back in a different perspective so that you can see that the bond market is what's driving the interest rates, the 30-year, 15-year, 10-year. If the bond market is traded like the stock market, and there's that uncertainty in these financial markets, the bond market itself is responding to some of that uncertainty, vis-a-vis the crazy Fed. God, because they're as uncertain as I am. I'm like, what are you guys doing? So just translate that as I'm on a microcosm of a macrocosm looking at the Fed going, oh my God, what are you guys going to do next? Because the Fed's not following fundamentals of paying attention to the lagging indicators of what this economy is doing. And so, you might hear things like soft landing, hard landing, all of those things because of what's happening with the market and the economic forecast for our world. But factors such as inflation and other economic drivers, just about the things I was just sharing with you, and the policy decisions from this crazy Fed are all influencing mortgage rates because of the bond market and this widening spread. But because we have a widening spread, what's interesting is that there's room for the bond market and the rates to squeeze a little tighter back to that 1.72. But why does that matter for you? Hello, you're like, I just want to get a loan and have a good interest rate. That's true. This may feel very technical, I can assure you, and it's super granular. And I really don't like getting that way, but I just like people to be informed and have knowledge about what's actually happening in the world. Home buyers like you should understand this spread, because it means that based on this normal historical gap between the two, there's actually room for mortgage rates to improve every day. And what I know is that I don't tell people not to lock in their rates. I think that's a really important thing to do right now. But you can play a gambling game and wait for the dips, because they have come over the past year. The rates are up here, but then they'll dip down because it'll squash that gap from time to time on certain days. I don't recommend, because It's very heart palpitating to float. But here's the thing, is that these rates, they may dip down a 1/4 point, they may dip down a 1/2 point on maybe some day. But the fact is what you want to know is that you have the ability to buy a loan and really mitigate your payments. And also pay attention to what the rates are doing. Everyone's predicting that the rates, the Fed is going to start to pivot here any day now. I've been saying that for almost a year because they're crazy. But the experts think that what lies ahead, as long as inflation continues to cool, which it is, there are so many, the world is a different place in case you haven't noticed. So what happens is, and you may be doing this in your personal life, is that you're basing your life on a previous model when today's model is completely different. And the Fed is doing something very similar to that. They're basing all of their decisions on old models, which really are not relevant to today. So I'm hoping someday that they're going to wake up and see that. But there's a chief economist for First American, and he explains it this way. It's reasonable to assume that the spread and therefore mortgage rates are going to retreat in the second half of the year. Okay, we're already in that. And if the Fed takes its foot off the monetary gas, that tightening pedal, it's actually a brake, then it's going to begin to look like that spread will return to its historical average of 1.70 or 170 basis points. So those risks are here, risks are everywhere, and sometimes I think we spend too much time as a society with agencies that try to control things that would actually let themselves work themselves out. But it doesn't matter. That's my opinion. An article from Forbes said, the housing market watchers expect mortgage rates to remain elevated amid this ongoing economic uncertainty. And the Fed rate hiking more on inflation. They believe that rates peaked last fall, which they really did. They peaked last fall. Whether you know it or not, because you're following them closely, the 30-year interest rate has come down considerably since last fall, probably 3/4 of a point. But the thing is that you just keep hearing all this negative information out there about the Fed, and the Fed is doing these things, which is causing the bond market to freak out. So a decline to some degree later in this year, barring any unforeseen surprises, should really help us get to that place. Now, I'm going to say that when I talk about rates coming down, they're not going to come down to where you saw them in the 2s and 3s. That's just not going to happen again. That was historical. It was because of COVID and all of the other crazy things that were going on. So if we got to 4, oh my gosh, that's still an incredibly historically low rate. And so if we get to 5, which is what is probably going to happen the first part of next year, if we get to 5, it's not that far from where we are right now. And the thing about it is that you can really get down to the very low 6s if you have a great credit score. So you have control. You have control over what kind of interest rate you see. So just because you can see spreads and you know how the bond market works and all of that stuff, you're in control of your experience. And I say that over and over and over. Take ownership. Be the CEO of your life, and you will see magic happen. And if you want to know more about interest rates or real estate or mortgages, or you want to come move to Wichita Falls because you love everything you see on this channel, please subscribe to our channel. And if you want to talk to me, there's a link to scheduling a Zoom meeting in the first comments below, and I would love to share more about Wichita Falls, how to get here, how to find a better way to get interest rates lower and mitigate your mortgage payment. Y'all come back now, you hear?